The warden stood frozen, staring at the massive inmate unconscious on the concrete ground of the prison yard. The man was at least 6'4", 250 pounds of solid muscle, and he was sprawled out like he'd been hit by a truck. "What the hell happened here?" the warden demanded, looking around at the circle of inmates who'd suddenly gone very quiet. 5 minutes earlier, that same inmate had been standing, aggressive, challenging Mike Tyson in front of everyone. What happened in those 5 minutes would become one of the most talked-about moments in that prison's history. But before we get to that, if you're enjoying these Mike Tyson prison stories, we drop new videos every single day, so hit that subscribe button and don't miss out. Now, to understand how a routine afternoon in the prison yard turned into a moment that left the warden speechless and every inmate talking for weeks, we need to go back to the beginning. It was a Tuesday afternoon in 1993, about a year into Mike Tyson's sentence at the Indiana Youth Center. Mike had settled into prison life by this point. He'd established himself as someone who kept to himself, didn't cause problems, but also wouldn't be pushed around. Most inmates had figured out that leaving Mike alone was the smart play. The prison yard was the one place where inmates could get some fresh air, exercise, and relative freedom within the confines of the facility. It was surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire, with guard towers at each corner, but within that space, there was a basketball court, some weight equipment, and an open area where people could walk or run. Mike was in the yard that afternoon doing his usual routine. He'd jog for a while, do some shadow boxing, maybe some push-ups and sit-ups, just keeping his body active, maintaining the discipline that had been drilled into him since he was a kid training under Cus D'Amato. He was shadowboxing near the fence, working combinations, his movements still sharp despite being away from professional training for over a year. A few inmates watched from a distance, admiring the technique, the speed, the precision that had made him a champion. That's when Darius Cole noticed him. Darius was relatively new to the facility, having been transferred from another prison about 3 months earlier. He was 28 years old, stood 6'4", weighed about 250, and was built like he'd spent every day of his incarceration in the weight room. Arms like tree trunks, shoulders that barely fit through doorways, and a reputation for being aggressive, confrontational, and always looking for a way to prove he was the toughest guy in any room. Darius had heard about Mike Tyson being in the facility, but he dismissed it. So what if Mike was a famous boxer? That was on the outside. In here, fame meant nothing. Size and willingness to fight meant everything. And Darius, standing several inches taller and outweighing Mike by a significant margin, figured he could take the former champ. He started walking toward Mike, and his crew, 3 or 4 guys who followed him around, came with him. Other inmates noticed and started gravitating toward the area, sensing something was about to happen. Mike saw them coming but didn't stop his workout. He'd dealt with guys like this before. Usually, they just wanted to talk, maybe get some attention by association with someone famous. But something in Darius's body language told Mike this wasn't going to be a friendly interaction. Darius stopped about 10 feet from Mike, arms crossed, smirking. "Yo, shorty, you think you're tough?" Mike stopped shadowboxing and looked at Darius, then went back to his workout without responding. "I'm talking to you, Tyson," Darius said louder, making sure everyone could hear. "You think because you were a champion on the outside that you're special in here." Mike still didn't respond, just kept moving, kept working. More inmates were gathering now, forming a loose circle, that prison instinct kicking in when they sensed drama or violence. Guards in the towers noticed the crowd forming but didn't intervene yet, just watched to see if it would escalate to something requiring action. Darius stepped closer. "What's wrong, scared? You know I'm bigger than you. You know I'd destroy you in a fair fight." Mike finally stopped and turned to face Darius fully. "I don't want any trouble, man. I'm just trying to do my time and get out. You should do the same." Darius laughed, looking around at the growing crowd. You hear this? The big bad Mike Tyson don't want trouble. What happened, champ? You get soft in here. Or you just scared because you know if you fight me and lose, they'll add more time to your sentence. Mike's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his voice calm. I'm not scared of you. I'm just smart enough to know that fighting you doesn't help either of us. Walk away. Walk away. Darius took another step closer, now only about 5 feet from Mike. Nah, I don't think so. See, everyone in this yard thinks you're some kind of legend. I think you're overrated, and I'm about to prove it. Mike took a slow breath, that familiar feeling rising in him, the one he'd spent years learning to control, the one that cuss had taught him to channel only when absolutely necessary. You really want to do this? Yeah, I really want to do this, Darius said, and he reached out to shove Mike's shoulder. What are you gonna? He didn't finish the sentence. Mike's right hand shot out faster than anyone watching could fully process. It connected with Darius's jaw with a crack that echoed across the yard. Darius's eyes rolled back immediately. His knees buckled. His massive frame, all 250 pounds of it, dropped straight down to the concrete like a building being demolished. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. The yard went completely silent. The only sound was Darius's body hitting the concrete with a heavy thud. Mike stood there, fists still clenched, looking down at Darius, then slowly looked up at the crowd that had formed around them. His expression was calm, almost bored. Anyone else? Mike asked, his voice carrying across the silent yard. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Darius's crew, the guys who'd walked over with him acting tough, they all took a step back, hands up slightly, making it clear they wanted no part of whatever had just happened. Mike looked around the circle one more time, making eye contact with several inmates, making sure the message was received. Then he went back to his shadowboxing, as if nothing had happened, as if there wasn't a 6'4" man lying unconscious 10 feet away. That's when the guards reacted. Whistles blew, radios crackled. Guards came running from different parts of the yard, batons out, ready for a full-scale riot. And right behind them came Warden Richard Morrison, a man in his 50s who'd run the facility for over a decade and thought he'd seen everything prison had to offer. Morrison pushed through the crowd of inmates and stopped dead when he saw Darius on the ground. His eyes went from the unconscious man to Mike, who was calmly continuing his workout, to the dozens of inmates standing in a circle, all of them suddenly very interested in looking anywhere except at the warden. What the hell happened here? Morrison demanded, his voice sharp with authority and confusion. Nobody answered at first. The inmates looked at each other, at the ground, at the walls, anywhere but at the warden or Mike. I asked a question, Morrison said, stepping closer to the circle. Someone better start talking, or everyone here is going to segregation. Mike stopped shadowboxing and turned to face the warden, his expression neutral, relaxed. He was running, Warden. Got a little too excited, moving too fast. He tripped over his own feet and fell. Hit his head pretty hard on the way down. Morrison stared at Mike, not buying it for a second. He tripped. Yeah, Mike said, nodding seriously. He was really excited about something. Running around, not watching where he was going. Happens. Morrison looked at the other inmates. Is that what happened? There was a pause, and then one of the inmates nodded. Yeah, Warden, he was running, lost his balance. Another inmate chimed in, tripped over his own feet. We tried to warn him to slow down. A third inmate added, yeah, he just went down hard, bad fall. Morrison looked from face to face, and he could see it. The fear, the respect, the unspoken agreement that nobody was going to say what actually happened. Not because they were protecting Mike out of friendship, but because they just watched Mike Tyson drop a man 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier with a single punch, and the last thing anyone wanted was to make an enemy of him. All of you are telling me, Morrison said slowly, that Darius Cole, one of the most aggressive inmates in this facility, was running around like a kid on a playground and tripped. Multiple heads nodded. "Yes, Warden." Morrison looked back at Mike, who just shrugged slightly as if to say, "What can I tell you? That's what happened." The warden knew he was being played. He knew exactly what had happened, but without a single witness willing to say it, without video evidence. The cameras didn't cover this particular corner of the yard, and with Darius unconscious and unable to give his version, there was nothing Morrison could do. "Get the medical team out here," Morrison ordered one of the guards, "and clear this yard. Everyone back to your cells, now." Inmates started dispersing quickly, no complaints, no resistance. As they walked past Mike, several of them gave him small nods, not friendly exactly, but acknowledgement, respect, understanding that the pecking order had just been reinforced. Mike started walking toward the exit with everyone else, but Morrison stopped him. "Tyson, a word." Mike turned and walked over to the warden, his demeanor still calm, still relaxed. Morrison lowered his voice so only Mike could hear. "I know what happened here. I know you hit him. And I know every single one of these inmates just lied to my face to protect you." "I don't know what you're talking about, Warden," Mike said evenly. "The man tripped. Everyone saw it." Morrison stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "You're either the luckiest man in this prison, or you've figured out how to survive in here better than anyone I've ever seen. Maybe both." "I'm just trying to do my time, Warden. Stay out of trouble." "Stay out of trouble," Morrison repeated, a hint of dark humor in his voice. "Right. Go back to your cell, Tyson. We'll talk more later." Mike nodded and walked away, leaving Morrison standing in the yard, watching as medical personnel loaded an unconscious Darius onto a stretcher. Later that evening, word spread through the entire prison about what had happened in the yard. The story got bigger with each retelling. Some versions had Mike knocking out 3 guys. Others had him fighting off a gang. But the people who were actually there, they knew the truth. Darius woke up in the infirmary several hours later with a fractured jaw, a concussion, and no memory of the actual punch. He tried to tell the medical staff and guards that Mike Tyson had sucker punched him, but with dozens of witnesses saying he'd tripped and no evidence to support his claim, nobody believed him. When Darius was released back to general population a week later, he avoided Mike completely, wouldn't even make eye contact. The aggressive, confrontational guy who challenged the famous boxer had learned a lesson that no amount of size or muscle could overcome proper technique, speed, and the cold precision of someone who'd spent their entire life learning how to hurt people efficiently. Mike, for his part, went back to his routine, shadowboxing in the yard, reading in his cell, doing his time. But after that day, nobody challenged him again. Nobody questioned his reputation. Nobody made the mistake of thinking that because Mike was shorter or because he was famous that he was somehow less dangerous than anyone else in that facility. The warden never officially acknowledged what had happened, but he also never forgot it. In his decades running prisons, he'd seen countless fights, countless displays of violence, but he'd never seen someone handle a situation quite like Mike Tyson had that day, avoiding conflict until it was unavoidable, ending it in seconds when it became necessary, and somehow getting every witness to lie on his behalf. That's the story of the day Mike Tyson was challenged to a fight in the prison yard, and what the warden found when he arrived 5 minutes later. Not a riot, not a brawl, just one very large inmate unconscious on the ground and a legend reinforced. Mike Tyson didn't survive 6 years in prison by being the toughest guy in every fight. He survived by being smart, by choosing his battles, by showing restraint when possible and overwhelming force when necessary, and by earning the kind of respect that made dozens of men willing to lie to authority figures rather than betray him.